Another day, another real-world test. Today, we're doing it on the Google Pixel 7 Pro, and we're gonna go explore while we test out the phone as per the usual, and we're gonna go a little further north in Manhattan than we did in the last video, which was already pretty far. But, first things first. Hi. Coffee. Check. And welcome to the Cloisters.
It's a museum here in the neighborhood of Washington Heights that's kind of unique. It's part of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and is called the Cloisters because it consists of 4 cloisters, covered walkways surrounding an open area that is usually associated with monks and monasteries. Now, that does make sense because the crazy thing about these cloisters is that much of the architectural structure of them come from medieval cloisters in Europe. American sculptor George Gray Bernard purchased these and many of the other artifacts at the museum while overseas and eventually sold them to John D. Rockefeller Jr., who purchased it for the Metropolitan Museum. The building here, meant to resemble a monastery itself, was built in the 1930s, but the cloisters and a lot of the other architectural artifacts were incorporated into the design. So we have original stained glass windows, statues, arches, etc., all from much older sites. It's a very cool way to incorporate artifacts and makes for a very interesting I Spy game as you wander around. They also have a ton of other relics though, all with a medieval nature to them, including tapestries and even ancient books. And regardless of that, it's a surreal place to just come and sit and read a book if you wanted. But while we're here, let's talk about the design of the Pixel 7 Pro. So firstly, we have a camera bar that is a single piece of aluminum. Last year, it was glass, and it wraps into the side rails. Now the Pro is a glossy aluminum, while the 7 is a matte. And while I usually like matte metal better, I understand why they did glossy here. It kind of gives it this more premium, more jewelry-esque look to it. It's the same thing that kind of happens with the iPhone Pro models versus their regular models as well. Now for those curious, we have a new, faster, in-display fingerprint sensor that works pretty well. And for the display, we have a 6.7-inch 1440p 120Hz LTPO display. It can go from 10 Hz to 120 Hz depending on what is on the screen. It can't go all the way down to 1 Hz like the S22 Ultra or the new iPhone 14 Pro models can. Also, the phone is actually 1080p out of the box. You need to toggle on QHD Plus to get it to that higher resolution. I'm gonna leave it on whatever it is by default, just for this test. Now the Pixel 7 Pro has a curved display compared to the Pixel 7's smaller, lower refresh rate, flat display. But the curve is less. And I do like the look of a curved screen, but I understand why people get annoyed with it. So this maybe is a good balance between the two. We also do have an option for an always-on display like we usually do with Pixel devices. You have to turn it on in the settings, it's off by default. And I like it, it's okay, but I've said this before in my iPhone Pro videos because I kind of like the always-on display of those because it kind of shows everything. It shows notification. If you really want, you can turn off the privacy settings and it'll show the entire notification. It just, in general, has a lot more information on that always-on display ready to go than the Android equivalent in this Pixel one does, where they just kind of have an icon to let you know you got a telegram, but you don't know from who or what. It's a personal preference thing though, for sure. Now the screen also has a 25% higher peak brightness. We can get up to 1000 nits for HDR content and 1500 nits of peak brightness, which only ever happens, just like it does on most of these phones, when you're in bright daylight. Now putting that next to the newer iPhones, they get about 2000, but the difference is not quite linear, so it's not gonna be 25% brighter on the iPhone, it's just a bit brighter.
Speaking of that new design, if you want to protect it or even negate the camera bar if you're not into it, we should talk about today's sponsor real quick, Rhino Shield. Rhino Shield makes cases that aren't just extremely impact protective, they also look good. I personally like that they're just not bulky. They have their solid suit line that is their no fuss protective case that comes in a ton of designs, colors, and finishes, but they also have their modular Mod NX cases for iPhones, which allow you to mix and match a backplate with various case rim colors, but also swap out the backplate for a bumper case, if that's more your style. They also have a new grip that you can attach to the back of your phone, either with MagSafe for iPhones or a super strong reusable adhesive for the Pixel and other other Android phones that can be used to prop up the phone in various ways, as well as be used to hold the phone by when you slide it open. They also have a ton of exclusive cases from NASA, PewDiePie, League of Legends, and a ton of others, and you can even design your own case with your own images and text. They have cases for all of the new iPhones, as well as many flagship Android phones too. They also ship worldwide and have free shipping for qualified orders, as well as a lifetime warranty for their cases. Head to the link in the description below to check out their cases, and use discount code UNLOCKER7PRO for 20% off the first week after this video goes live, and 10% off after that.
That seems dangerous. I mean, at least they got a sign. That is a fair point. Wildlife up here in the Cloisters.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your help, man.
Thank you.
I'm gonna try to make it before the sun goes down. Have a good one. Bye. Man, it was very nice. We were trying to figure out how to get, driving-wise, as close to the lighthouse, which is where we're going now, as we could. And I think you got me pretty close. See if we can make it before the sun sets. That's the point. And here is a path across the highway to hopefully get to the lighthouse over there. We found it. And welcome to the Little Red Lighthouse, aptly named.
Its official name is the Jeffrey Hook Light, but after the 1942 children's book The Little Red Lighthouse and the Great Gray Bridge, well, that name kind of stuck. Now that Great Gray Bridge, in reference, is the massive George Washington Bridge that connects this part of Manhattan to Fort Lee, New Jersey. And well before this bridge was built though, there were apparently a lot of boating accidents from the very busy traffic going down and up the Hudson River here, not seeing the Jeffrey's Hook, which is the point of land that jutted out here, and so in 1889, a red pole with a tiny light was added. They were like, that'll fix it, no problem. Now eventually, of course, a lighthouse was built, but this lighthouse itself was originally across the river, and then it was reconstructed and moved here in 1921. By the time the bridge was built in 1931, the bridge was enough to kind of signal, hey, there's land here, and the Coast Guard decided to put out the light in 1948. But since that book I mentioned came out in 1942, well, the public was outraged. And by public, I mean mainly children who had read the book and obviously their parents. And instead of auctioning the lighthouse off like they wanted to, the Coast Guard then donated it to the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation in 1951, and in 1979, it was put on the National Register of Historic Places, and in 2002, the light was turned back on. Now, while we're here though, let's dive into the cameras on the Pixel 7 Pro. Now, for the main camera, we have a 50 megapixel quad-binned main sensor. This is the same as last year's, but we now have a 2x zoom feature, which is a bit better now as it takes the center 12.5 megapixels of that sensor and kind of uses that to do an optical crop technically. We've also now seen the iPhone 14 series do this as well. But the software on the Pixel 7 Pro, as is the usual, does a lot of stuff. So between the 1x and the 5x, it also will take images from the 5x telephoto that we now have to add details to the other images for better quality. Speaking of that 5x telephoto, it is a 48 megapixel folded lens, and it bins the pixels by default, same as the main sensor does. And again, if you're not familiar, what that does is it takes 4 of the pixels in this case, and it combines them into 1 to give us a lower resolution but much larger pixel sized image, which should translate to better low light and better better dynamic range. Now, just like with the 2 times that they do on the main sensor, Google actually does crop out the 12 megapixels in the center of this 5 times sensor to get a 10 times optical zoom. And they also have an improved super res zoom, they call it, which is just their technology for sharpening and combining the images to get a much better looking, further away digital zoom. And they can do that on this model now up to 30 times. Also, seemingly having borrowed something from Samsung, at 15 times and further, there is a stable crosshair that appears similar to the S22 Ultra, which helps you compose and stabilize photos at that far of a focal length, just because it's very shaky when you start to get that far. Now, we also have a new 12 megapixel ultra-wide sensor with autofocus, which allows it to do macro mode, just like with the iPhone series. And thankfully, most importantly, it is a wider 125.8 degree field of view. So we get 0.5 times compared to 0.7 like we did on the last model, which was a big complaint for me because I felt like that 0.7 was never really a big enough difference from the main sensor for the drop in quality especially to warrant using. Now at least, it maybe is. The Pixel 7, on the other hand, has the standard wide angle that we've had from last year, no autofocus, no macro mode, and it has that 0.7 times field of view instead of 0.5. So that's going to be one of the differences between these 2 models, in addition to the 5 times telephoto that is absent on the Pixel 7. Now in the front, we have a 10.8 megapixel selfie camera with a 92.8 degree field of view. It's down from 11.1 megapixels that was on the 6 Pro, but it's supposedly better quality. We also now have face unlock on a Pixel again, which we haven't had for a long time, and it uses that front-facing camera to do so. But because it is just using a camera, it tends to work well most of the time, but as soon as you get into a scenario where there is less light, it kind of struggles. A lot of times it just doesn't work. Now, of course, you can have it and the fingerprint on at the same time like I do, so you can always just use your finger, but it's missing all that other hardware that, say, like Face ID has on an iPhone, so it's not going to have as good of low light performance as that. Now, for video, we have 4K 60 on all of the cameras now, including the selfie camera, which only had 4K 30 on the Pixel 6 Pro, and we can do 10-bit HDR, which just makes colors brighter, more vibrant, gets a little bit more dynamic range. Truthfully, though, it converts it to HDR format, which when you're trying to edit the footage can be a pain. Also, you can't mix that footage with non-HDR footage, so me trying to put it in this video, you're not going to see the correct way that it would look unless I made an entire HDR video and uploaded it as HDR. So yeah. Google did also say that they've partnered with Snap, TikTok, and YouTube. I mean, they didn't partner with YouTube, they own YouTube. But they did all that to allow the HDR content to work well when uploading to those platforms. Now, we do also have active stabilization, which we've had on Pixels for a while now. They apparently upgraded that slightly, so it's more stable. And we also have cinematic blur now, which allows you to mimic the look of a much larger sensor with a fast aperture lens. I personally never really like this. I would rather just have the natural bokeh that happens from when you use the normal camera sensor, because they are relatively a lot larger than they used to be, but maybe that's just me.
Welcome to the Uptown Garrison, a bar quite close to the bridge here that apparently opens up at 7 a.m., does a decent breakfast, and has decent coffee, and then slowly throughout the day converts into a dark, usually pretty busy cocktail bar. I'm not gonna lie, I really like the vibe. Also, they have a pretty good buttermilk fried chicken that comes with hot honey on it and ranch, cause duh. And their pizzas are a thin crust and pretty good as well. While we're here, let's talk a little bit about the software on the Pixel 7 Pro. Firstly, we have a new piece of silicon from Google called the Tensor G2. Now this is running on a 4 nanometer process, which the Tensor 1 was 5 nanometers, so that should increase the speed and power efficiency to some degree. Now, Google claims that it's 60% faster at machine learning related tasks and 20% better at machine learning efficiency, as in power saving. And with Google, that is kind of all they really care about, because they want to do as many things on this phone in terms of software as they possibly can. And a ton of that uses machine learning and AI to get that done. So Firstly, they claim a 2 times faster night sight processing, which I can confirm is definitely faster, and that's nice. Now they also claim that it enables a photo unblur feature, which can detect blur in images and fix them, but in the Google Photos app. Now, they say right now it's only on the 7 and the 7 Pro, but I mean, like, we've even seen the Magic Eraser get ported to other devices, so how much of this actually is based on the Tensor? And it's probably not. I don't know, it's probably more efficient on the Tensor, but it's not required, I would imagine. But for now, only on the 7 and the 7 Pro. The one nice thing though is you can use it on any photo you've ever taken that's in Google Photos. It doesn't have to be one that was taken by the 7 and the 7 Pro. So it's an interesting way to update old photos. It works okay. I haven't seen any crazy remarkable results with at least the photos that I've been using it with, like what Google showed in their presentation, but it does something. And maybe for different types of photos, it might do better. Now, a new feature also on the 7 and the 7 Pro only is we can transcribe voice notes, but only in Google Messages, and turn them into text, so you don't have to actually sit there and listen to them. I actually really like that feature. I wish it worked in other apps though, because I don't use Messages as much as I use, say, Telegram or even WhatsApp. So if it would come to those, that'd be more useful for me. But if you use Messages a lot and you don't really want to always listen to the voice notes, that's a welcome feature. We also have an update to Direct My Call, which is when you use the phone to call into an IVR, essentially an integrated voice response, it will now automatically show you all of the results, probably based on past people calling in, immediately. So press 1 for this, press 2 for that, and those will just show up literally as options that you can tap on the screen instead of having to listen to the whole menu. Google also said that the Recorder app, which has actually been pretty crazy when I've used it, it's really good at transcribing things in real time, but now it's going to be an update that will allow speaker labels. So once you label somebody, it will know that person's voice, and it will label all of their words that way, in addition to other people's with their own labels, etc. It's not out yet though. It's supposedly coming later this year. And lastly, there is a clear calling feature now that apparently uses machine learning to eliminate background noise on phone calls from your end to the person you're talking to on the other end. So if you're in a noisy environment using your Pixel 7 or 7 Pro, the other person will be able to hear you better when you're talking to them on the phone, is the idea. Okay, calling it a night. Now, firstly, my battery died very early on in the day. Here is my screen on time, my usage for today. For anyone who's curious about that, please keep in mind, as always, this is a real world test. I used the camera a ton, more than you ever would probably. And so obviously this is not a normal day. Also, keep in mind that for screen on time, if that's something you're looking at, you need to subtract all of the time from the night before, since it uses a full 24 hours, which is always annoying, but there you go. Now here though is another day that was not a real world test day. It was a much more normal day. Overall, the battery it's meh. It feels kind of like the Pixel 6 Pro did in that it's not amazing. And as soon as you start using the camera, it really starts to drain very quickly, as illustrated by the battery usage that you just saw, and that is very much the same for the Pixel 6 Pro. So similar maybe. Now even with that, I don't know. I like this Pixel 7 Pro. I'm not gonna lie. It feels very much like a refinement and an improvement of the 6 Pro, which I also really liked. I think they're really leaning into the refinement of the styling. It looks a little bit better than the 6 Pro did. It feels lighter, actually, which is interesting. And just overall, it just feels good. And of course, the photos are great. The 5 times telephoto is even better than the 4 times that we had. And all the other AI stuff that they're doing to get the images looking good in between the focal lengths and even beyond the 5 times is actually pretty impressive. And considering it starts at $899, that's cheaper than most flagships that you're gonna find, and with all of the normal things you expect from a Pixel to do well. The only thing I will say is the price of the 7 Pro, very much like the 6 Pro was, seems like a big jump from the non-Pro model, in this case, the Pixel 7. There's a $300 difference, and really the biggest thing is that telephoto lens. The screen refresh rate is 120 instead of 90, but it's not the biggest thing. I will say you do also get that better ultra wide on the 7 Pro, but does all of that equate to $300? Or should you just go for the Pixel 7? You guys tell me. Love to hear from you in the comments below. Would you choose Pixel 7 or the 7 Pro. Would love to know why you guys would make that choice, actually. Thanks. Now, if you haven't already, please subscribe and ding the bell next to the word subscribe so you get notified when I do new videos. Also, shout out again to the sponsor of this video, Rhino Shield. Check them out at the link below. Otherwise, it's been a long whirlwind of a day. This video, future David, who's gonna edit this, good luck. You're gonna need it. This was just all over the place, but we'll see. Hopefully by the time you guys see this, it's decent. So here's hoping to that. Anyway, I'm exhausted. Good night. Okay. Door. Even in my own home, sounds, lots of sounds. Even in the middle of the night.